Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The 1837 treatise by Evangelista Purkyne, titled Über die subjectiven Empfindungen, represents a profound reorientation in the scientific study of vision. Presented as a summary of his extensive investigations, this work functions as a condensed manifesto for a new kind of physiological inquiry, one that takes the internal, subjective experience of the observer as its primary object and instrument of analysis. In an era dominated by the physical optics of Newton and the anatomical descriptions of static, lifeless structures, Purkyne proposed that the living, dynamic eye generates its own phenomena, which, when systematically catalogued and provoked, could reveal the intricate workings of the sensory apparatus. This essay will undertake a direct section-by-section evaluation of the core claims and methodologies presented within this seminal work, assessing the logical coherence of Purkyne's arguments and the enduring validity of his conclusions. The analysis will proceed by examining the distinct categories of subjective sensations he identified, from the mechanically induced light patterns to the subtle shifts in color perception, thereby tracing the development of his revolutionary physiological epistemology. The ultimate aim is to illuminate how this concise yet monumental paper established the foundations for modern sensory, physiology and experimental psychology by demonstrating that the observer's consciousness, far from being a source of error, had a rich and structured field of data revelatory of its own biological subs. Section 1. The principle of methodological subjectivity. Purkyne's work commences with an implicit yet powerful foundational claim regarding scientific method. He posits that the subjective sensory world, the realm of personal experience, is a legitimate and fertile ground for rigorous scientific investigation. His entire project is built upon the premise that what one sees in the absence of a corresponding external object, or as a modification of that object, is a direct report on the state of the visual system itself. He conceived of subjectivity as a precise instrument for discovery. The method he champions involves a systematic self-stimulation combined with meticulous observation and documentation. This approach transformed the idiosyncratic flicker and fleeting afterimage from anecdotal curiosities into repeatable, quantifiable data points. His claim is that by controlling the input, whether it be pressure on the eyeball, and defined electrical stimulus, or a carefully managed light source, the resulting subjective perception becomes a dependent variable, a reliable indicator of the underlying physiological process. This methodological stance is perhaps the most radical assertion in the entire treatise. It proposes a form of empirical inquiry where the experimenter and the experimental subject are fused. The validity of his subsequent claims therefore rests upon the integrity of this initial principle that a trained, attentive observer can distinguish, categorize, and reliably reproduce internal sensory events. He asserts that these phenomena, though private, possess a universal structure rooted in the shared biology of the human nervous system. His work thus presents a framework for turning the theatre of the mind into a laboratory, a claim whose audacity is matched only by the elegance of its execution. His subsequent sections of his Section 2. Luminous figures from mechanical and electrical stimuli. Following his methodological premise, Purkyne presents his analysis of luminous figures, or phosphenes, generated by nonphotic means. His first set of claims concerns the effects of mechanical pressure on the eyeball. He documented the appearance of luminous geometric patterns, often described as a checkered or rhomboidal grid, following the application of firm, localized pressure with a fingertip. His central argument here is twofold. First, he claims that the specific form of this luminous figure is a direct consequence of the physical stimulus acting upon the retinal tissue. Second, and more profoundly, he infers, The geometric regularity of the perceived pattern mirrors the anatomical organization of the sensory elements within the retina itself. The checkerboard is, for him, a glimpse of the retina's own granular structure, a self-portrait of the sensory mosaic. A similar line of reasoning underpins his claims regarding galvanic stimuli. By applying a gentle electrical current to the region of the eye, he observed distinct flashes and patterns of light, whose character varied with the polarity and placement of the electrodes. His evaluation of this phenomenon led him to claim that the nervous tissue of the eye is intrinsically excitable and that electricity acts as a direct trigger for the same physiological process. That light normally initiates. The critical evaluation of these claims reveals a brilliant deductive leap, while his specific interpretation of the phosphine's geometry as a literal map of retinal cells was an anatomical speculation exceeding the evidence available. His core conclusion was fundamentally correct. He established the retina as an active, excitable neural substrate capable of producing the sensation of light, irrespective of the stimulus modality. This claim effectively severed the necessary link between external light and internal perception, relocating the genesis of sensation firmly within the biological tissue. The phosphine became proof that we see with our nervous system, a concept of immense consequence for all subsequent neurophysiology. Section 3 Vascular figures and the retinal map. Perhaps the most celebrated of Purkyne's demonstrations involves his claims regarding the perception of the eye's own vascular network. In this section of his work, he details a specific technique for rendering these internal structures visible by holding a bright, focused light source, such as a candle, at the periphery of his visual field and making small, rapid movements. He rendered visible a shadowy, branching figure, which he immediately identified as the retinal blood vessels. This phenomenon, now known as the Purkyne tree, formed the basis for one of his most powerful and logically sound claims. He argued that for these vessels to cast a shadow upon the light-sensitive part of the eye, that sensitive layer must necessarily lie behind the vascular network. This was a piece of anatomical and physiological reasoning of the highest order. At the time, the precise locus of photoreception within the complex layers of the retina was a subject of debate. Purkyne's experiment provided compelling functional evidence. The inference is a model of scientific deduction. If structure of blood vessels casts a shadow upon structure B, the photoreceptive layer, then structure B must be positioned to receive that shadow. His claim thus addressed a major anatomical uncertainty through a purely subjective, perceptual experiment. Furthermore, he claimed that the central point of this vascular pattern, the area from which the vessels appear to radiate, corresponds to the optic nerve head. The fact that this central point was a blind spot in his perception of the figure provided conclusive proof for its identification as the exit point of the optic nerve, a region devoid of photoreceptors. Through this elegant and repeatable self-experiment, Purkyne claimed to have created a living map, an in vivo angiogram of his own eye, and in doing so, offered a definitive functional argument for the location of the sensory layer of the retina. The claim's strength lies in its inescapable logic. Using the principles of optics within the biological context of the living eye to solve an anatomical puzzle. Section 4 Afterimages and Temporal Dynamics of Sensation. Purkyne's treatise dedicates significant attention to the systematic study of afterimages, phenomena he categorized with a naturalist's precision. His claims in this domain move beyond mere description to posit a theory about the temporal dynamics of the visual process. He meticulously distinguished between positive afterimages, which retain the colour and brightness of the original stimulus, and negative afterimages, which exhibit complementary colours and inverted brightness. His central claim is that these lingering sensations are evidence of a physiological process that persists in time, long after the external stimulus has ceased. He argued that staring at a bright object induces a state of intense excitation, In a specific region of the retina, the subsequent positive afterimage represents the gradual decay of this excited state. The negative afterimage, in turn, is claimed to be a sign of retinal fatigue or adaptation. By exposing one part of the retina to a strong colour, for instance red, that area becomes less sensitive to red light when looking at a neutral white surface. This fatigued area responds less to the red component of the white light, resulting in the perception of the complementary colour, cyan. This explanation, framed in terms of physiological exhaustion and recovery, was a powerful conceptual model. It represented vision as an active, metabolic process with its own inertia and refractory periods. Purkyne's further claims involved the duration and vividness of these afterimages, which he related to the intensity and duration of the initial stimulus. He was essentially plotting the response curve of the visual system over time. Evaluating this section reveals a clear departure from a passive, camera-like model of the eye. His claims imply that the retina possesses a form of short-term physiological memory, with each sensory event leaving a temporary trace that influences subsequent perception. This introduction of a temporal, dynamic dimension into the physiology of sensation was a crucial contribution, laying the groundwork for future studies of sensory adaptation, temporal integration, lineal coding of visual information over time. Section 5 Color Phenomena and the Purkyne Shift. Within his discussion of subjective visual experience, Purkyne presented a series of observations on color perception under varying levels of illumination. This section contains the nascent form of one of his most famous discoveries. He claimed that the relative brightness of different colors changes as ambient light fades from daylight to twilight. He described the specific phenomenon that in bright sunlight, a red geranium appears brilliantly luminous, often more so than a blue cornflower. As dusk descends, however, this relationship inverts. He claimed that the red flower becomes a dark, almost black patch, while the blue flower retains a ghostly, silvery luminosity and appears comparatively brighter. This observation, now universally known as the Purkyne shift, was a profound claim about the functional properties of the human eye. The implicit argument is that the eye's spectral sensitivity is not fixed, it is a variable that depends on the intensity of ambient light. This directly challenged the prevailing notion of a single, uniform visual system. Purkyne's claim contained the powerful hypothesis of a duplex visual system, even though he lacked the anatomical evidence to articulate it in modern terms. He was describing a functional duality, one system for bright, photopic conditions that is most sensitive to longer wavelengths like yellow and red, and another system for dim, sphotopic conditions that is most sensitive to shorter wavelengths like blue and green. While he could only describe the perceptual effect, his meticulous observation provided the first clear evidence for the separate functions of what would later be identified as cone and rod cells. The evaluation of this claim shows it to be a masterpiece of observational science. Without any knowledge of retinal cell morphology, he deduced a fundamental principle of visual physiology based entirely on a carefully observed subjective experience. He demonstrated that the very rules of colour and brightness perception are contingent upon the environmental context, a discovery that rooted vision deeply in its adaptive, biological function. Section 6 Entoptic Phenomena and the Eye's Media. Purkyne's catalogue of subjective sensations extended to the more common, often ignored phenomena occurring within the eye's own optical media. This section of his work focused on what are known as muscivoletantes, or flying flies, the small, shadowy specks and threads that drift across the visual field. His claim here was one of precise localization through the application of physical principles. He argued that these were not illusions or retinal artifacts, but were the shadows of actual opacities, likely cellular debris, floating within the vitreous humour, the gelatinous substance filling the eyeball. The brilliance of his analysis lies in the method he employed to support this claim. He applied the principle of parallax. By holding his head still and looking at a uniform surface like the sky, he observed the floaters. Then, by slightly moving his eye or the light source, he could induce a relative shift in the position of the floater's shadow against the background. He claimed that the direction and magnitude of this parallactic shift allowed him to calculate the approximate depth of the opacity. Within the eye, an object closer to the pupil would show a different apparent motion compared to an object deeper within the vitreous, closer to the retina. This elegant application of geometric optics to a purely subjective perception was a powerful demonstration of his overarching program. He was, in effect, performing a non-invasive survey of his own eye's internal contents. The evaluation of this claim highlights his capacity to unify physics, anatomy, and subjective experience into a single, coherent investigative framework. He took a common annoyance and transformed it into a tool for anatomical exploration, proving that even the most trivial of subjective visual events could yield precise scientific information when interrogated with the right conceptual tools. This solidified his argument that the eye is its own observable universe, with its own internal physics and celestial bodies. In conclusion, a meticulous evaluation of the internal claims within Jan Evangelista Purkyne's 1837 treatise, Über die subjectiven Empfindungen, reveals it as a document of extraordinary scientific originality and logical rigor. Across each category of phenomena he investigated, his work consistently advanced a singular, powerful argument that the contents of sensory consciousness, when systematically interrogated, reveal the functional architecture of the nervous system. From the geometric phosphenes he claimed were maps of the retinal mosaic, to the vascular shadows, at settled anatomical debates, his assertions were built upon a foundation of repeatable self-experimentation and impeccable deductive reasoning. His analysis after images introduced a critical temporal dimension to physiology, framing perception as a dynamic process of excitation and recovery. His observations on colour in twilight contained the functional proof of a duplex retina, long before its anatomical basis was known. Even his study of vitreous floaters demonstrated the power of applying physical principles like parallax to the inner world of the eye. The enduring significance of the work lies in this successful fusion. Purkyne's ultimate achievement was the establishment of a new scientific object, the subjective sensation, and with it, a new and powerful methodology for exploring the living sensory system. He provided a definitive demonstration that the boundary between mind and body, between subjective experience and objective physiology, was not an impassable barrier but a permeable membrane, through which the very processes of life could be observed. His treatise is more than a catalogue of curiosities. It is the founding charter for a science of the senses that takes its own experience seriously.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.